Okay, so Gojo versus Goku, the overpowered sorcerer of Jujutsu Kaisen versus the ever-stronger fighter of Dragon Ball. I'm not gonna bore you through the whole speech again, since this is a topic I already covered kinda recently, like just a few months ago. Do watch that video if you haven't. Now, why am I covering this again? Well, that video kinda blew up, and when that happens, you get a lot of comments. And a lot of these comments really gave a lot of perspective to how this fight might go, and some things I may have gotten wrong. So it only feels right to go over that stuff and even correct myself on a few points. First things first, this is not a contest of physical power. Goku is just stronger. We're at a point where universal power is small-time stuff. Gojo isn't anywhere near that. So this video comes down to whether or not Gojo can overcome this sheer difference in power with his complicated hacks abilities. The first one to go over is the simplest, Gojo's greatest offensive technique, Hollow Purple, where he collides the infinities of his red and blue techniques and produces an incredibly powerful ball of energy. Depending on how you interpret this power, you could even say it has matter erasure properties based on some of the wording here. The problem is that really shouldn't matter either way. In the manga of Dragon Ball Super, Goku can even kinda use Hakai, which is just straight up existence erasure. Body and soul gone as if they never existed. So I can't count something as an advantage in Gojo's favor if Goku has a better version of the ability. And I failed to mention this in the last video, but Goku even kinda tanks God of Destruction energy, so he has some resistance to this kind of hacks. In short, Hollow Purple isn't gonna do anything. Okay, so purple is out. What about infinity? Well, this is the thing I covered most extensively in my previous video on the topic, but I did fail to mention some things. Now, one of my main arguments in that video was that Goku might be able to actually just punch through infinity. This is a massive oversimplification, but Gojo's infinity kinda simulates the effect of infinite distance when dealing with an approaching attack, making it never hit. I make the argument that Goku scaling to Jiren's overcoming of Time Prison through sheer power could let a person scale Goku's speed to infinite or even higher potentially. And because of this, Goku might be able to just punch Gojo and end the fight like that. I go into a lot more detail with this in the last video, so again, check it out if you haven't. Now, this idea was never one I was too committed to, but I did go into it because I thought it was interesting. There are much better arguments, like as we can see with Buu and other instances, Dragon Ball characters are powerful enough to just rip through dimensional barriers, so it's possible that spatial manipulation like infinity probably wouldn't work on Goku, going by that logic at least. Another argument I see people bring up a lot is instant transmission. Basically, the idea goes that Goku could just teleport directly to Gojo and go right past infinity. Now, this isn't an outright bad argument, but this one really depends on how we're interpreting infinity here. Because if Gojo is literally creating infinite distance all around him all the time, then yeah, instant transmission isn't going to work because it has a finite range. But this idea of infinite distance is not the most consistent. Before awakening, Gojo had to consciously activate it and maintain it in order to block attacks. But after awakening, he was able to set up an automatic response mechanism where it will only work on things deemed dangerous through a myriad of factors. So no, it doesn't seem to be making an infinite distance around him at all times. We see this when he first demonstrates this automatic system. And I mean, even simpler things, characters can see him, hear him talk, sense his cursed energy. Things that wouldn't be possible if Infinity was doing that at all times. So the way I see it, if Gojo is standing right in front of Goku and Goku decides to use instant transmission instead of going for a normal punch, it's reasonable that Goku would just be able to bypass Infinity that way, since the way Gojo normally has Infinity active is that it needs to detect and respond to an incoming target, and it wouldn't be able to respond to something that already made contact without traveling any distance. Although honestly, feel free to argue with me in the comments on this one. I feel like this is the most debatable aspect of this matchup because it heavily depends on exactly how you interpret Infinity, which is an ability based on mathematical concepts that was written by a guy who is self-admittedly very bad at math. None of this really matters though, since at the end of the day, Goku could just blow up the Earth. Gojo could survive that, but not the lack of air that comes after. So being able to kill Gojo isn't actually an issue. The fun part of this matchup is just whether or not Goku can do it in a more conventional way. Now moving on to the reason I originally wanted to make this video. In my last video on this, I made the argument that Gojo's best win condition was this. Goku is really bad about letting his guard down, and when that happens, his durability massively drops. Everyone knows about the time a basic rock hurt him because he wasn't paying attention. Now Gojo has the ability Unlimited Void, which basically stun locks a person's brain. So I suggested that Gojo could use this on Goku and forcibly take his guard down, and then just a normal punch from Gojo would get the job done. But after a lot of consideration and thought, this is way more complicated than I originally thought. Now first of all, how does Unlimited Void work? Its initial presentation seems like something that overloads a person with information so they can't process it all. But from the volume extra page on the ability, that's actually just how it feels to the target. In reality, it's more of a repetition of fake sensory data that feels like information overload. If it can land on Goku, that might end up being a win condition for Gojo. Now, in my original video, I made the argument that Goku's counter to this would be Ultra Instinct, since it shouldn't matter that his brain is incapacitated, since that form makes it so he doesn't have to think while he fights. His body just does stuff in response to his opponent. However, like I said, this is more complicated than I originally thought. Starting off, there is one mistake I did make. Kinda. Because while Ultra Instinct does bypass higher thought processes when it comes to decision making, that doesn't mean the brain is irrelevant. Goku's brain is still probably being used to take in sensory information. Ultra Instinct is just streamlining the process of using it. That being said, this isn't the case for every action. And this is when something called a reflex arc comes into play. You see, a reflex arc is what allows all of those automatic responses that you have. Like when you pull away after touching something hot. It's the body moving without the brain's involvement. And Ultra Instinct likely makes use of this bodily mechanic since it's just that on a much greater scale. That being said, this probably doesn't matter for Unlimited Void. Otherwise, when it was used on Jogo, we would have seen him at least flinch when he got his head torn off. But since he doesn't seem to have any automatic response, even a person's reflexive actions seem to get shut down by Unlimited Void. That being said, it's kinda weird that Jogo had his mind completely overwhelmed by Unlimited Void, but he was also able to process and think about what was happening to him. So maybe Unlimited Void just suppresses your sensory intake and ability to act on that information. It's possible that it actually doesn't have much impact on your higher thought functions. In which case, yeah, Goku might not be able to move, but he also wouldn't be taken off guard and lose any durability. In which case, Gojo's domain expansion would not be a viable win condition. I think my main point here is that this interaction of Unlimited Void and Ultra Instinct is a much more complicated thing than I originally thought. Another thing is, Goku might just be able to overpower Unlimited Void. Now, an activation of Unlimited Void was able to give a person about half a year's worth of information in just 0.2 seconds. And when a character has superhuman speed, they also generally have superhuman reaction speed, which is basically the ability to take in more sensory information and respond to it faster. Now, Goku has been faster than light for a very long time and is now thousands of times stronger than that, depending on how you scale it, which means that Goku is able to see and interpret things at that insane speed. One could make the argument that Gojo could flood Goku's mind with a bunch of incomprehensible information and Goku would simply comprehend it. It's kind of impossible to calculate the numbers for this sort of thing. I just think that argument is a bit funny to think about. Again, none of this really matters. Anyone who can blow up a planet and then survive beats Gojo, since they can just let the vacuum of space finish him off. But if we take that off the table, there's a lot of interesting stuff to discuss when it comes to this fight. So let me know your thoughts. I'm glad I remade this video to really go into how my opinion opinion has developed on it, but I'm sure I'll once again be hit with some things that I didn't think of, so let me hear it. And while you're down there leaving a comment, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. In the meantime, I hope you have a good one and take care.